Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Palavita. I'll be your host for today's show. And today we're going to be discussing how do vaccines work? I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of a miracle, but most people, we don't have educational courses. I don't remember taking vaccinations when I was in middle school or high school or frankly, any school at all. And no one ever explained to us how it works. So we need to find somebody who can explain it to us. And with that, we do have a medical doctor, a board certified internal medicine medical doctor out of Hawaii who can actually discuss and show us how a vaccine works. So we're going to bring in the star of this show, Medicine and Science, Dr. Michael Patmos. Dr. Michael Patmos, welcome to your show.
Good morning, Nick, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to your audience for giving me a precious few minutes to spend some time with you. In addition to being an internal medicine physician, I also have added qualifications in infection control and hospital epidemiology and a master's degree in physiology and biochemistry. So this area is an area with which I have some degree of expertise and can comment on as a relative expert. So let's talk a little bit about how do vaccines work? Because you're absolutely right. There's widespread, enormous misunderstanding about this topic. And there are so many false statements that have been circulating on social media and in the mainstream media that we need to dispel because people believe all kinds of incorrect things about vaccines. So let's start with I think in order to start any conversation about how vaccines work, we have to start with understanding of what the immune system is. The world we live in a microbial world. If you remember your high school biology and you took a drop of pond water and looked at it under the microscope, the microbial world is filled with things that we can't see. There's all kinds of germs, bacteria, fungi, viruses, protozoans, all kinds of creatures and critters out there. And those creatures and critters would invade our bodies if we didn't have a protective immune system. So the purpose of the immune system is to protect our body from being overtaken by these invading pathogens. The first component of the immune system is the skin. The skin is a physical barrier. It's the largest organ, and it's the first wall of defense. It's a physical barrier against invasion by microorganisms. If you have an opening in your skin, you know what happens. You can get an infection. So the skin is the first part. The next part of the immune system is the antibodies. So when you are exposed and you do get a pathogen into your system, the body produces antibodies. Antibodies are little molecules that recognize the antigen, the foreign thing, and glom onto it and make it big so that the rest of the immune system can gobble it up. But then there's also cellular mediated immunity, where the body, the lymphocytes in our system, these are a type of white blood cells, remember the invading pathogen, and they remember it forever. And if they ever see that pathogen again, they can ramp up and produce antibodies. So that's just a real brief, simplified overview of the immune system. There's a physical structural component to it. There's an antibody response called the humoral response. And then there's this enduring, long-lasting response called the cell-mediated immunity, which is produced by memory lymphocytes, which remember the infection forever. That's how you get long-lasting protection. So what is a vaccine then? Well, a vaccine is any substance, and there's many different kinds of vaccines. What a vaccine does is it gives the immune system a little sample, a little taste test. It's like a trailer at the movie theater, coming attractions. It tells the immune system, hey, this is what's out there, this little tiny bit of it, so you can prepare, the immune system can prepare for it and build up an immune response in anticipation of this pathogen entering. So what a vaccine really is a little taste test of the infection to give the immune system a chance to prepare ahead of time. Being prepared ahead of time means that if the infection does occur, the immune system is right there, ready to respond. And it gobbles up and grabs onto the pathogen and gets rid of it before it can make you deathly sick. That's how vaccines basically work. Now, if you go back to the first vaccine in 1796, Edward Jenner took pus from cowpox lesions and exposed it to patients. And lo and behold, they developed immunity against smallpox. But over the centuries, vaccines have become more and more and more refined. So that was a very crude vaccine, pus basically. But other vaccines have been developed that are, the virus itself can be alive but attenuated, so it's a broken virus. It can't make you sick, but it can stimulate your immune system. You can extract a piece of the virus that is non-infectious but can teach the immune system. And then the most elegant and wonderful breakthrough of all is messenger RNA vaccine, where nothing from the invading pathogen is injected, but a string of information that codes for one of the antigenic entities, or it's a string of information that codes for part of the pathogen is introduced. Our bodies then manufacture it. We recognize that pathogen, and now we're prepared for it. And that's why mRNA vaccines are the cleanest, most elegant, and the best version of any vaccine we've ever had. That's why I got the Nobel Prize. So, what is the purpose of vaccination? Many people have this misunderstanding. They say, well, you got vaccinated, but I still got COVID, so that therefore the vaccine didn't work. No, the primary purpose of vaccination is to prevent death. That's what we in medicine do. We want to stop people from dying unnecessarily. The second purpose of vaccination is to prevent you from being seriously sick and ending up in intensive care on a ventilator for 6 months. Preventing all infection is a very worthy tertiary goal, but it's far from the primary goal. Our goal is if you prepare the immune system so that if you do get infected, you won't die. That's what, and the COVID vaccine does that very well, about 90 to 95% reduction in mortality. So when people say, well, I got the COVID vaccine and I still got COVID, so therefore the vaccine is worthless. That's a myth. That's misinformation that was circulated by fake experts. That's the purpose of vaccination. So one of the things how do we measure a vaccine's effectiveness? Well, it produces an antibody spike. After you get vaccinated, the body appreciates the little sample, and it makes antibodies, so they're floating around in your bloodstream. But those antibodies don't float at a high level there forever. They taper as time goes by. And a lot of the anti-vaxxers and those who don't understand this say, well, that just proves the vaccine doesn't work. It loses its effectiveness. No. The rise and the fall of the antibody titer is not the measure of a vaccine's effectiveness, because we also have cell-mediated immunity. Let me give you a great example. There was a famous case. This was done at the University of California, San Francisco, where they took blood from lymphocytes from a patient who had survived the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. And they exposed that patient's lymphocytes 100 years later, in 2018, to antigen from the Spanish flu. And guess what those lymphocytes did 100 years later? Instantly, they produced antibodies against the Spanish flu. So what that shows you is that memory lymphocytes, the cell-mediated immunity part of our immune system, remembers the infection. And even though the antibody titer may have declined, the body can rev up this response called an anamnestic response and produce antibodies very quickly. Without a vaccination to prepare the immune system, it takes the immune system about a week to rev up and make antibodies. That's why it takes you a week to get over a cold, because your body's not seen that virus before. But when you have a vaccine and you have antibodies already there, you're prepared immediately. And if you have a cell-mediated response, within hours, your body is producing antibodies. So that's basically how vaccines work. Now, another very important point is they work really well. If you look at all the things that we vaccinate for, the reduction in mortality is stunning. 95, 98, 99% reduction in mortality. That's what I'm talking about. Diphtheria and measles and polio and all these horrible diseases that don't, if you're vaccinated, your chances of catching them are reduced. Your chances of being really sick are much less. Your chances of dying are dramatically reduced, including with the COVID vaccine. Now, the COVID virus is constantly evolving because we got all these people out there who are infected and they're making copies of the virus, including mutant copies. So you have to get revaccinated periodically for the version of the virus that's circulating now. The version of the flirt COVID virus that's out there now is very different than the first version of it. Messenger RNA. I just want to say one last word about messenger RNA. People say, well, it's not a vaccine. Yes, it is a vaccine because you're introducing a substance into the body that prepares the body for the infection. So it most certainly is a vaccine. It cannot become part of your DNA and get into your genes, as some fake experts have said, because you can't go from RNA back into DNA without an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. There's no reverse transcriptase in the COVID vaccine, so that can't happen. Vaccines can't cause the disease. They're not like when you get the flu vaccine, because I got the flu vaccine and I caught the flu. You can't get influenza from the vaccine. That's not possible. So why does it happen? Because people take it at the same time of the year that colds are out there, and they think that head cold is the flu, and they misattribute that. So that, I know I went through that kind of quickly, but hopefully that helps to explain a little bit about how vaccines work. Messenger RNA technology won the Nobel Prize, was developed by Dr. Carrico and Weissman at the University of Pennsylvania. That's who developed the COVID vaccine and the COVID vaccine technology. It was not invented by a medical student 35 years ago. It was invented by Carrico and Weissman. A lot of people worked on messenger RNA over the years. Many technicians, lab techs, medical students, college students in rotations working in a lab somewhere have touched that technology. But just because you were a medical student and you worked on this 35 years ago, when you were on a rotation, doesn't mean that you invented it. The credit goes to Carrico and Weissman. They got the Nobel Prize. I was just at Harvard a few months ago and I took a course, and I was really pleased to see that that the faculty there consider messenger RNA to be one of the top 5 most important breakthroughs in medicine in the last in recent memory. mRNA vaccines are coming not just for COVID, but influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, autoimmune diseases, cancer. There's now a phase 3 clinical trial in Europe of messenger RNA anti-cancer vaccines. I can tell you in not too long, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, everybody will be taking messenger RNA vaccines to prevent cancer. So the future is bright for vaccines. Vaccines have done more for humanity than anything else we have ever done in the sphere of public health. More lives saved, more misery averted. The only disease that's ever been eliminated from the face of the earth is smallpox, and that was done because of vaccines. We could do that with other diseases as well. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and allow your other guests to speak and take some questions.
So my question is, does all this happen in your body by feel, that these antibodies are bumping into stuff in your body, and when they feel something that is shaped wrong, then they attack?
Yes, that's a really great question. So what happens when an antigen enters your body, from a pathogen enters you, and it has these molecules on its surface that are antigens, the immune system will send cells out that will feel it actually and memorize the shape. They actually recognize, just like a key fits into a lock, they recognize the contour of these antigenic targets, and then they build an antibody that's an exact reciprocal of the target. So it's a mirror image. It's a sort of a reverse mirror image. And so whenever it sees that antigenic target, it grabs it, and then it gloms onto it, and it pulls the antigen into the lymphocytes where they get gobbled up.
So with COVID, like when you see pictures of it, it looks like it's covered with little doorknobs.
Right.
And so they learn the shape of the doorknobs, but because viruses are sloppy, the shapes of the doorknobs mutate over time.
Yes, the doorknobs, those spike proteins, are like a key that allows the virus to get into your cells. Now, COVID isn't the only virus that has spike proteins. Other viruses do too. And so what happens is the immune system now recognizes that spike protein and says, aha, there's a burglar at the door, and he has a key to get into the cells. I'm going to go intercept him. So what happens is the immune system goes and grabs the burglar before he can get in.
So those doorknobs are like little grabby things that grab your cell, and
Yes.
then out of the middle of them, they shoot like a wad of genetic material to hijack the cell.
So what happens is the spike protein interacts with a receptor on your cells in your throat, where it first gets into your system. And when the spike protein interacts with the receptor, it opens the cell, your cells, and allows the virus to get inside. And once the virus is inside, it says, aha, I got inside this guy's house, and now I'm going to take over his stereo system. The virus gets inside your cells, and it takes over your nucleic acid transcription translation machinery to make more copies of the virus. And that's how you spread the disease. That's why when you're not vaccinated and you have no immunity, the virus gets in you, you become the host. You're now just like a computer, you're infected, and you now start to spew out copies of the virus, billions and billions of copies of the virus, just like an infected computer can spam out email. You're now got the virus, you're now the manufacturer. You've given your body up to produce more virus. That's called being a host reservoir.
It's like that video game and TV series, The Last of Us, where fungus, mushrooms, basically take over people and hijack their brains to make them attack us. I mean, it's the key to every frickin' zombie thing.
Yeah. Yes. Well, there's an underlying, sort of foundational truthfulness to that. That's what happens. These viruses get into your inner cellular environment, produce more of themselves. Bacteria just float all around and release toxins and gobble things up. Fungi grow off of you, just like a downed tree in the forest. You'll see mushrooms growing out of it. So all of these pathogens have their own way of doing harm. But what vaccines do is they teach your immune system how to recognize it before you get infected, so that you have some measure of protection. It's never 100%, but hey, 95% reduction in death is pretty darn good.
So I've read. Go ahead.
Dr. Patmos, when these vaccines are produced, does the medical profession, do they go through any studies to make sure that they're effective, or do they just throw the vaccines out there?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's another myth that's been circulated in the anti-vax world by fake experts with false credentials. Vaccines are tested extensively prior to their being released in all kinds of levels of trials. They're not going to take something as just right off the shelf and just throw it out and give it to people without testing. They're tested extensively. Now, that doesn't mean that historically some vaccines have had some risk. There's always some risk, and some people react in a paradoxical way. There is even some risk with the mRNA-based COVID vaccines, small though it may be. Like myocarditis was the one that everybody got excited about. There is a slight increased risk of myocarditis, but almost all the cases of myocarditis from COVID vaccines are mild and transient and go away. So, but it's all, we monitor continuously. We never stop monitoring. And there may be things that, show up somewhere down the road. But what I can tell you right now is these vaccines are extensively studied, thoroughly tested. They are safe and effective. And anybody who says anything other than that is wrong.
Mm-hmm. So, what name some of the organizations that actually do this type of work? Are they government controlled? Are they independent organizations? Who actually oversees the vaccine industry? Some people say, well, Big Pharma totally controls this. Is that true, or are there independent reviewers of these?
There's a lot of oversight, a tremendous amount of oversight. To even get to do a study like this requires all sorts of approvals and regulatory stuff. But pharmaceutical companies do a lot of this research. Academia, professors in medical schools and universities and medical centers do a lot of this research. The FDA And the CDC does research, and FDA funds research. The National Institutes of Health funds research. Many organizations, the American Cancer Society funds research. So there's lots of funding sources, and there's lots of organizations that can do research around vaccines, and they all have to abide by certain standards of quality and safety and oversight. You can't just go do this on your own. So there's a lot of oversight of the vaccine industry because we want to make sure the vaccines are safe and effective.
I think I've read that like 8 years ago, Jimmy Carter was saved from brain cancer by a new vaccine, that they studied the cells and found a way to make your immune system grab the cells. And before then, this cancer was super nasty.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I can tell you that, we've been trying and working on vaccines ever since I've been a doctor for 43 years. And, there have been attempts to make vaccines against melanoma and other really bad cancers. And it's not been that productive. It's been difficult to do. Messenger RNA changes all of that. Messenger RNA is so elegant and has such promise. I think we're going to see, mark my words, watch this 5 years from now, we're going to have all sorts of messenger RNA-based vaccines against other infections, autoimmune diseases, and cancer.
I hope so, but I've read that some cancers are easier to vaccinate against than others because some cancers they don't have as many easily identifiable shapes on their surface.
Yeah, you have to have an antigenic target that's recognizable enough by the immune system, and that produces a good immune response. So selecting, what is the exact antigenic target, that's a real challenge. And that's beyond my level of expertise. There are folks obviously know a lot more about how to do that than I do. But what I know as a clinician is that, I have seen over 300,000 patients in my 43 years in medicine. And there's no question, if you are in the trenches at the front lines, wearing a white coat with a stethoscope, taking care of sick people, that the difference between life and death many times is whether or not you're vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a little older than my wife, and she gets a little sicker from vaccinations. And I think for her, that's a good thing. I think it means her immune system is stronger. So for older people, older people get, they are more in danger of getting sick than younger people. Is there a way to take somebody's immune cells out of their body and like grow a bunch more of them and stick them back into their body?
That's a question beyond my ability to answer that right now. But what I will tell you is, yes, you're right. I'm so glad you made that point. When you get vaccinated and your immune system gets a little sample of the pathogen, it responds, and you might feel a little yucky. You might feel a little feverish, maybe a little achiness at the site of the injection. You might feel a little punky, or even have a low-grade fever. That's all to be expected. Now, when people say, "Oh, you have all these adverse effects, thousands of them," those are insignificant adverse effects. Those are good things. They're a sign your immune system is responding. And you made another point. You said, it's really the elderly who are at greatest risk. For most infections, that's true, but not in all. The Spanish flu, the influenza of 1918 and 1920, singled out mostly young, healthy men to kill. That virus killed preferentially young, healthy people. So the idea that, well, I'm young, I'm in my 20s, I'm physically fit, I don't have to worry about getting it. If I get sick, it's not going to be any big deal. No, some viruses actually are more deadly in young, healthy people than in
also the Spanish flu messed up people's brains. So does COVID. And if you look at what happened to the world in the 20 years after the Spanish flu, depression, fascism, the KKK, and finally World War II, you got to wonder if the Spanish flu cooked young men's brains and made them more susceptible to like violence and stupidity.
I don't know about those things, but I can tell you that it's been well reported, well documented in the medical literature that patients who survived the Spanish flu were much more likely in later decades to develop Parkinson's disease. So there is a relationship there. It's not too dissimilar from patients who have measles and then later on get subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, or it's a neurological disease that follows measles. decades later, just as Parkinson's disease followed the Spanish flu. So yes, these viral infections can have very long-lasting danger. So people say, I don't want that spike protein. I don't want that vaccine. I'll take my chances. Look at it this way. You're going to get COVID. You're going to get this virus sooner or later, one way or another. You either get the whole virus and have a risk of death, or you get a little piece of the RNA that can teach your immune system to recognize it so that you don't die. But either way, you're getting the spike, you're getting this virus, one way or another. You got a choice. You get the whole virus and get infected, maybe die, or you get vaccinated and you get protection.
There's a pretty good movie from like 20 years ago with De Niro and Robin Williams about the people who got basically were paralyzed and put to sleep for decades by the aftermath of by the Parkinson's caused by the Spanish flu, and about the doctor who figured out how to wake them up again.
I'm not familiar with that one, but
it's called Awakenings. It's kind of interesting.
I'm a little sheltered. I just spend all my time reading about medical stuff.
Medical stuff. Well, what are we looking forward to right now in terms of new vaccines? Are we going to see developments in the area of cancer and heart disease, which are the two leading killers in the United States?
I don't know about heart disease, but I can tell you there's very exciting news. Is just last week, they announced a phase 3 clinical trial in the UK for messenger RNA-based vaccines that are targeted against a number of common cancers, including melanoma and pancreatic cancer. If you have ever had a family member who suffered from metastatic malignant melanoma, you know how tough that disease is to deal with. It's very bad outcome. If you've ever seen anybody suffer and die from pancreatic cancer, you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. We have a vaccine, a messenger RNA-based vaccine. It's under phase 3 clinical trials right now. That if it works, if it shows efficacy in these phase 3 studies, it has shown efficacy in phase 1 and 2. If the phase 3 confirms benefit, we'll have a vaccine against these cancers that are horrible cancers from which the death rate is really high. We're on the brink of a messenger RNA-based vaccine technology is a new chapter in science. We're at the brink of a whole new day, and I hope I live long enough to see it come to fruition.
Can I just do a PSA real quick? If you can get your insurance company, if you're in your 40s or older, and you can get your insurance company to approve an MRI abdomen, do it. Because like pancreatic cancer is terrible. And the reason it's terrible is by the time it causes symptoms, you're in stage 4 and it's probably already spread. But if you catch it early, it's not that nasty, but to catch it, you need to do like an ultrasound or an MRI.
You know, that sounds great in theory, Rick, but the problem with that is there's all these false positives. And so if you just do an MRI, screening MRIs on everybody, you're going to see all kinds of stuff and think, oh my God, there's this, there's that cancer. And then the patient is subjected to an invasive procedure unnecessary. So you have to be a little careful with that. Screening an asymptomatic population, if the risk of disease is lower, then the risk of false positive, you might actually do more harm.
All right, but I'm like, I'm a hypochondriac and I have really good insurance, and I'm like, take a look inside. They found a kidney tumor in me before, early on, before it could cause symptoms.
Yeah, and that is true. In 1 out of 1,000 times, you're right. There's a whole company called Lifeline Screening that's based on that very same principle. The problem is that 999 times out of 1,000, you get false positives. So, but for you, it worked. It paid off.
Yeah, and also like don't do it. I think Lifeline uses a CT scan, which is if you can avoid that, like that blasts you with radiation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. You're right.
Well, I'd like to do a future show on mRNA relationship to cancer, because cancer is like the second leading cause of death. And pancreatic cancer, last time I looked, Dr. Patmos, the survival rate was like 5% or less.
It's awful.
That's sentence.
I've seen many, many people die of pancreatic cancer, and there's better chemo now. Today in 2024, we have chemo and monoclonal antibody-based treatments that have had some success and are prolonging life. But pancreatic cancer, unless you catch it really early before it's spread, is largely a terminal illness. And it's it's funny. I learned this 50 years ago in medical school. It's kind of, you diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, you got 3 months. That's basically what, and it hasn't changed much. Even with the new treatments, it's a little longer, but it's still largely a terminal illness. And my God, if we could make a breakthrough there, it'd be a great day for so many people.
Well, we're going to have to do that on a future show because we're out of time. So we want to thank our viewers in the United States and also viewers in Great Britain and around the world for tuning in to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. And we'll see you next week at this time. Take care until then and stay away from all the bad stuff in life. Bye-bye.